As the debate over public and charter schools builds, a proposed moratorium on new city charters. And after months of closed-door talks, the first public discussion of a proposed financing plan for a new NBA arena. But what would the proposal mean for other Milwaukee institutions like the Wisconsin Center? This is Council Rewind, and I'm Dustin Weiss. Before the city's portion of an arena financing plan was even officially put forward as legislation, there was already controversy in the works. Later in the program, the committee discussion that drew a capacity crowd to City Hall. But first, the growing conflict between public school advocates and charter school backers is coming to a head in the state capitol and here at City Hall. Amid concerns that charters are diverting needed resources from public schools, Alderman Tony Zielinski proposed a 5-year moratorium on new charters so the city can assess their impact. But he ran up against opposition at the June 11th Steering and Rules Committee.
This ordinance proposes a 5-year moratorium. As it's been alluded to earlier in the meeting, the fact is these charter schools are growing at a very, very rapid rate. It's also been alluded to earlier in the meeting, the amount of money that this is costing the system. And we're going to reach a certain point where we're going to lose so much money where the system will just go bankrupt. I don't believe in waiting to the 9th hour to try and deal with the problem. I think we need some breathing space to try and figure out how we're going to deal with this particular issue before we're, in the final moment. We've got time right now to try and find out how many more students we'll lose in the MPS system before we actually go bankrupt. And I think we need to start looking at that very thoroughly at this point in time. And consistent with that is I think we just need to put a hold on any further charter schools. If you're an existing charter school, you're in. This doesn't address you. We don't want to impact the existing charter schools with this ordinance here. We're just saying, hey, we gotta pull in the reins here a little bit until we get a handle on what's going on and develop an action plan so we can prevent the MPS system from going bankrupt.
I've already been on the record stating that I'm in support of a public boarding school, whether it's private, charter, or choice. And so at this particular time, I cannot support this resolution.
As part of a larger debate, I know that there are very passionate people on both sides of this issue. And I think that there certainly are gray areas in between over providing measure of choice and the funding level, which it may impact in the system that most children are in. That being said, I don't see this as a simple solution, and nor do I see this as an effective measure in addressing what we currently are providing here at the city. I applaud the first two pieces of legislation. I think certainly greater transparency, greater accountability within our existing system is part of the tougher choices. And the other reason why I just simply don't support this at this time is I also believe that if when we talk about the whole politicization of these issues, that there is no turning off the so-called spigot. We look at, and I'm not trying to connect dots that frankly may not adequately appear, but I think it's very evident to many that with the leadership that we have in the state legislature, in the governor's office, that charter schools will be here to stay. And if we attempted to turn off the spigot here at the city, frankly, there would be another mechanism that would be opened up by the state legislature. We have seen this type of mechanism be discussed, and I think will be supported, even with what they're attempting to do with failing schools and utilize the office of the county executive and usurp power from the MPS school system on those particular things. The one thing that we do know is that would actually take control away from this community of having a group of leaders from this community who represent this city as part of the decision making of a type of school system that would exist. I will not support this here at this time, and I think more appropriately, Mr. Chairman, that this is probably something that should just be held at the call of the chair.
Motion has been made by Alderman Bohl to hold at the call of the chair. That's a motion that supersedes the motion for approval. So for the young people here who are watching, On the motion to hold in committee, is there any objections to that motion?
Mr. Chairman?
Alderman Zelinski.
Okay. I'm going to oppose that motion. No one is saying that this is a solution to the problem. I wish solutions to problems were that simple, but they're not. What I'm saying is, and it should be abundantly clear, this is a step towards reaching that solution. I think that this will further help educate the public about what a precarious position we are in if we allow present trends to continue. The fact remains, if present trends continue and we don't come up with a creative plan, MPS system will go bankrupt. If that goes bankrupt, the city of Milwaukee taxpayers are going to be on the hook.
I pretty much agree with everything Alderman Zelinski said about the intent behind this ordinance. I've been contacted by a number of advocates who see this ordinance as having a potential to push back at the larger deluge that's coming our way, primarily from state legislators. But where I disagree with it is really a function of a tactical disagreement. That state legislation is a deluge, and there's the potential always, as Alderman Bohl indicated, for the state to overrule us on a number of these matters or to remove authority, because we have, a lot of these educational issues, whether it's vouchers, charters, or the public schools. Not just the funding, but the authority ultimately does come from the state in many cases. So I want to be realistic about our own power. And I think the other point that Chairman Bohl made indicates that this is largely symbolic, just like item number one. Item two is pretty substantive. We're actually going to get more transparency out of it. Item one, it's more than symbolic. It's including information in what we do, but it doesn't necessarily directly affect our decisions unless we choose to allow it to. But we can declare a moratorium in June, and we can undeclare it in July. It's 8 votes one way, 8 votes the other. And just in general, regardless of the particular issues, no matter what we're talking about, the idea of a legislative body indicating its future legislative intent through legislation doesn't make a lot of sense to me just on a formal level.
The proposal was held at the call of the chair on a 7-1 vote. A day after the unveiling of the Cheaper to Keep Them Milwaukee Bucks arena funding plan, Mayor Tom Barrett appeared before the Steering and Rules Committee for the plan's first public discussion. A cooperative agreement with the state of Wisconsin, Milwaukee County, and the Wisconsin Center District, the plan would foot half the cost of the $500 million facility. The NBA says it'll move the Bucks out of town if the arena's not built, but it has to get legislative approval from the state, the county, and the city. If its first run before the Steering and Rules Committee on June 5th is any indication, that could be a tough sell.
First, I want to say thank you to the mayor, his staff, for agreeing to meet on one day after the announcement that the mayor, the county executive, the state legislative leaders, along with the governor, on the outline of a proposed statewide resolution, or at least statewide proposal for the Milwaukee Bucks arena. I felt it was very important that the community at large have an opportunity to hear more about the details. For the most part, most of these discussions have occurred behind closed doors. This is involving a substantial amount of money, involving public money. And I felt very strongly, along with all my colleagues on the committee who have also privately expressed the same issue, that a full public discussion. In addition, the mayor was fully in agreement, felt very strongly, in fact, has asked me on other occasions to have the opportunity to have the Milwaukee Bucks come in and make a presentation, and we will be following up on that. In addition, I do want to thank the mayor, who has briefed members of the council, perhaps not all the members of the council, but many members of the council during the last 6 months. Obviously, a lot has changed in 6 months, from the governor announcing, I believe in January, to pay your way, to now cheaper to keep them. It's gone from a $220 million proposal down to a $50 million contribution from the state. So the slogans keep moving, and so did a lot of the issues. And in fact, it was difficult to keep up with the changing dynamics. And let us be very clear, based on Senator Fitzgerald's comments yesterday at the press conference, at this point in time, we're clearly not sure yet whether or not this will be passed by the state legislature. So despite that, I think it was important that we still have an opportunity to hear the outlines in more details in terms of the specifics as it relates to the state proposal, but in addition to what the city is being asked of.
You made reference to the changing nature of these conversations. And without a doubt, this debate has taken many, many different twists and turns over the last few months. What I said at the onset of this was that I supported the construction of a new arena, that I wanted the Bucks to stay here, but that I was not willing to devote property tax dollars to this and did not want a new tax. I sit before you today to say that we have been successful in maintaining the position that we began with. And what I want to do this afternoon, and this is going to be a conversation I think that's going to last for more than just an afternoon, but I want to focus a little bit on the negotiations that took place at the state. I want to go into more depth as to the city's role in this, and I want to answer any questions that you have. Going back to the proposal, as you mentioned, President Murphy, when the governor first proposed this, it was based on the premise that the state was going to be collecting a lot of additional revenue in income taxes because of the players' salaries, because of the new television contract. That television contract is going to dramatically change the landscape in the NBA. What happened, though, during the negotiations is the state moved away from that commitment to capturing those dollars and was looking for a much, much more of a local presence in this. And when I say local, I'm not saying necessarily the city, but the county and the Wisconsin Convention District, which is going to be playing a significant part of this, and we can talk about that. And again, that'll be something that will be talked about in the community, I'm sure, for weeks to come before this finally comes to fruition. The conversation at the state, and you alluded to this in your comments, was based in part on the tensions that are existing in the state legislature right now, and at what level, if any, the state legislature is willing to be engaged in this, even though from a government revenue perspective, the state of Wisconsin is the one that clearly gains the most dollars. Again, and that is because of the income tax that is paid for by the players. That income tax would disappear if the Bucks were to leave this city. And that's an important fact that we all have to have in our mind in terms of why, from a fiscal standpoint, this is a relevant deal for the state. Again, we know there are challenges at the state, just as there may be challenges here, but that was the starting point. As we move through the conversation, again, my position was I was not going to devote property tax dollars, and there were different routes that were being discussed, one of which was the issue of collection of old debt. And we decided that was something that the State Department of Revenue raised in the course of the conversation, that it felt that there would be dollars that could be used to help offset the local share of this, whether it's the county share or the city share, through the collected debts. We all, here at the city, we have, and Alderman Witkowski knows this very well because he's led efforts to collect more of our unpaid debt. We have unpaid debt here at the city. The county has the same. But we felt, for a number of reasons, and we can go into depth if you want to go into depth about those, but we decided that was not the route that we wanted to take. We wanted to go to a more traditional route. And when I mean a traditional route, places where the city feels that we are more equipped and are more in our comfort zone in operating. And that's going to be, I'll talk about that in a few minutes in terms of what we're talking about with the city's share. Ultimately, the breakdown for the state's package is like this. $55 million will be the state's share. The borrowing costs of that rise to make it approximately $80 million. But what I'm going to do is give you four numbers that will come to $250 million. So you sort of have the parameters of what we're talking about, because the goal was to get to $250 million in public money. 55 state, 55 county, 47 city, and then the remainder, which I think is 93, would be the convention district, and I can talk about that a little bit later. So the state for 20 years will make payments of $4 million a year. The county will be making payments of $4 million a year for 20 years. That will be done through an offset agreement that it has with the state collecting unpaid debts that are owed to the county. Again, that was where we took a different path. Our $47 million comes through $35 million, which will go to a parking structure north of the Bradley Center, a block north of that in the Park East, and a $12 million TIF, which will go to the public spaces, the plaza, which will be just east of the arena. So that's the $47 million. We have had conversations, and I'm going to go more into this later, with the Bucks for some additional services and additional things. But in terms of the agreement with the state and the package that's going to go before the state legislature, that is what our commitment is. It is important to note that we are the first money in. In other words, the state money does not get released until and unless we, the city, approve our participation in this.
We spent quite a bit of time working on the tax exemption for the project. I know this is an issue of great importance to the city, and we wanted to set a precedent here to limit that even further than what happened at Miller Park. So the way that the tax exemption is currently written is that it's limited to property that's owned by the Center District. That would be the arena and the plaza, which will extend across 4th Street. Anything that is open to the public on a regular basis, like a restaurant or bar, will be fully taxable, as will all of the other private ancillary development. Only the city's parking structure will be exempt, and that's because of by virtue of the city's ownership of it. The State Secretary of Department of Administration will be negotiating the lease for the Center District's board approval. The mandatory lease provisions are outlined in the legislation, and they're quite extensive, and they're meant to protect taxpayer interests.
The slide that you see obviously is the area in question, and actually a pretty good slide of the downtown and what's been going on in Milwaukee. And as everyone can see, obviously this is the missing piece, right, of development in this portion of the city. And if you look at this particular map, which shows a phasing strategy, and these are the blocks that we'll be talking about. Block 1 is the arena itself. Block 4 is what's been referred to as the live block, which is where a lot of the some of the beginning of the ancillary development is. And then that vacated portion of 4th Street is part of the public plaza that's being created with the arena. Block 6 and Block 7 are the current are currently one super block in the Park East. And Block 8 is, as we refer to it at DCD, the pork chop block. And Block 5 has the Sydney High parcel on it as well.
To answer the question for all of our citizens in Milwaukee as to why is there any public subsidy at all? I mean, why are we putting any public money into this project? We have, as has been well reported, some very wealthy individuals from New York City, acquired this team. They obviously are billionaires by all estimates, and they certainly have the wherewithal, if they would choose to use it, to build this arena entirely on their own, privately owned, like the United Center in Chicago, private building, private property, privately constructed, privately financed. I think that's the question that's maybe, now I think there's an answer to that question. But the bottom line is, I think that question needs to be answered in the premise, because we just assume, well, we're paying half. Well, why? I mean, I get that from people. Well, why are we paying half?
There really hasn't been a lot of conversation about, and again, I'm talking at the state level, because this is a question that I think state legislators are asking around the state. Why would we do this? The reality is, because of the new television contract signed by the Players Union and the NBA, the income tax revenues that the state is going to accrue are going to, and I've seen numbers from going from 5 to 25 million or 10 to 25 million, but there's going to be a significant jump in income tax revenues that go to the state of Wisconsin, all right? So the NBA has made it clear, if the Bucks are not here, or if there's not a new construction, my belief is in progress or completed by 2017, the team leaves the state. What does that mean? That means the $5 to $10 million, again, I've seen different numbers, that the state is currently receiving in income taxes. That money's gone. And any new dollars the state is going to receive in income taxes, that money is gone as well. At the local level, I'll tell you this. Am I interested in having a $500 million public works project paid half by private dollars? You bet I am. And if I can get local people working on this project, I am very excited about that. I want to put people in this city to work. And having a $250 million investment on the public's part, $250 million investment on the private sector's part is going to put people to work.
I might have a couple of big picture questions too, but on the details, especially the details that we'll have a direct vote on, we've talked a little bit. I'm glad the mayor and Alderman Hamilton asked that question about the effect on closing out the TIFs, but the $35 million for the parking garage, and Mayor, you mentioned that parking revenue along with the RPP, Residential Preference Program, were two of the maybe sticking points in the private negotiations. So I'd like to explore that, because on the surface, there is a similarity. The Bradley Center was, quote, a gift to the city, except it was a gift with the string attached of, but you must build a $25 million parking garage. So we make about $500,000 a year. We get everything, well, except that the last 2 years we've given the Bradley Center $175, which is why these numbers are in front of me, because we all, I think, remember that history. So the history has changed in the last 2 years. So I just want, knowing that, how does this deal work? We spend $35 million, and it's ours. Nobody pays taxes on it, but half the profits go to the Bucks?
Half of the yes, when I say the way that the agreement is structured, they would pay the operating and maintenance costs, so you take that off the top. The Bucks, and then we would split it 50-50. This is a give and take in the negotiations, and so when you said currently we get 500, I would say 500 less, 175, we get 3.25. Mm-hmm. Our initial estimates are we will be getting significantly more than that, even at 50-50 in this arrangement. Mm-hmm. So that was one of the things that drove our thinking in this.
Although we're investing $35 million up front just
right,
to get back
right.
to where we are now.
But bear in
I get that if
mind,
the Bucks leave,
bear in
we don't get
mind,
that money.
what we were asked to do was we were asked to come up with $47 million. And so I was looking for a way that we could come up with $47 million and we would have something to show for it. We have a hard asset to show for it, and we will have a public plaza to show for it. So I felt that that was a trade-off that I could defend. And again, if you look at, and I think this is worth exploring for all of us. If you look at the city's investment in the Bradley Center, which was, again, a gift, and you adjust those dollars for inflation, I think that you will say that this was a job well done by your negotiators on behalf of the city.
First of all, Mayor Barrett, thanks for actually taking a good first step on actually giving us a dollar figure that we can kind of focus on. On the county's debt, and I'll certainly say that I'm concerned about that, because as we take a look at court costs and outstanding fees, there's not statistical data that's out there, and I would hope that the county would take the position of giving that to the city of Milwaukee on the outstanding debt, because that could adversely affect the city of Milwaukee and its citizens. We know that there's a high percentage of Milwaukee citizens who owe that particular outstanding debt, specifically in the African-American community, because if you ever go down to the courthouse, you actually see that outstanding debt, whether in circuit court, that is there.
And my last question has to do with the Wisconsin Center District. Was one of the things that's been on the table at the Wisconsin Center District and is long overdue is expansion, or actually the Phase 3, and getting us up to be the size of cities our size when it comes to a convention center, or even actually under that is what the plan is. How does this redoing of the Wisconsin Center District and financing, how will that affect any possible expansion of the convention center? Is it dead?
Let me answer that question, because I think that's a legitimate question. There's no doubt that we are going to have to address the convention center needs. Again, for the next 13 years, its revenue, by and large, to the extent it's paying down debt, is paying off the current structures. So in year 13, that's when this kicks in, along with the interest. I think that this is going to bring to the forefront the convention district debate. In other words, what are we going to do? Because we don't want it to be an either-or situation. And that's something we have to address.
I do want to be cognizant of the mayor's time. It's been 2 hours of questioning and elaboration, and I think I'm proud to say that this legislative body is the first one who has really opened up this discussion to a greater community in terms of allowing questions asked by colleagues and making sure it's in a public forum where it's televised and people can hear what's going on and what the details.
The 93 million is the cash generated.
That's what
The
we
real
have to
cost
come
the
up
center
with on day
district is
one.
closer to more than double 93 million.
Yeah, actually, when you're talking $93 million, all of our bond issuances have had set aside a reserve fund with them. There's several $1 million in cost, legal costs, and all the associated costs with doing a bond issuance. I figure we're going to have to sell probably close to $105 million to generate $105 million in bond proceeds.
Was anyone given that clearly most of the public contribution is falling on the district, even more so when you consider real cost, not just current contribution, was anyone from the center district at all these meetings?
No, sir, we were not asked to be at the meetings. We did meet with Robin Voss late into the service and asked to be at the table, but we never materialized, sir.
It reminds me of the famous quote from, was it either Turkey or the Ottoman Empire after one of the big wars? They said, we're at the table, because if we're not at the table, we're going to be on the table.
I think you guys on the city side have done a fine job. The state and county piece stinks to high heaven. It's fundamentally dishonest. It's a fraud on the public. It is an absolute dishonest, and it kills any hope of convention expansion for the foreseeable future. For my lifetime, for his lifetime,
Foreseeable
for
future
probably
being
everybody in this
30
room's
years,
lifetime, it forecloses the possibility of convention, unless you raise all these taxes.
Pretty young.
Right? Isn't that a fair
Yes, sir.
statement?
Mr. Chairman, may I say something?
Yeah, just a second. Alderman, I assume that's a question, not a
That is a
rhetorical question.
question.
Yeah,
I
it
mean,
is,
really,
yeah. So let me hear from the director.
Sir, you're right. We've did our research, and if we could raise the food and beverage tax of downtown Milwaukee by one half of 1%, county tax, excuse me, we could generate about $12 million.
$10 million.
10 to 12.
Would grow quickly.
And we would be able to bond the expansion. At this point, we've got we're looking at the expansion study that was conducted a couple of years ago, trying to update that to see the exact dollars that would cost. But you're correct, if that's not feasible, which would have to be approved by the state legislature, we won't see an expansion. I did a convention center inspection fact sheet that outlines what would happen if the expansion did occur and what would happen if the expansion didn't occur. And right now, we bring in the Wisconsin Center District to Milwaukee County, southeast Wisconsin, about $500 million in economic impact every year. So with that going up, with that expansion, we'd definitely be in with the rest of our peers and bring in a little bit more of that economic impact.
And remain competitive.
And thank you, sir, and remain competitive, because if we don't, right now, we're at about a Tier 2 city. Yeah, we're not going to compete with Orlando. We're not going to compete with Detroit, Chicago. But if we don't get the expansion pretty darn quick, we're going to be a Tier 3 city. And I love Omaha. I lived there. I served there in the Air Force. But I don't think our convention center wants to be Omaha or one of those smaller cities. So we do have to do that. We do have to do it quick. And I understand the Bucks. I understand the need for them. I understand the importance of them. But we are looking at new dollars with the convention center.
The meeting was purely informational. Legislation will have to be introduced and passed in order for the plan to go forward with the city's blessing. And that's a look back at some of the important issues discussed in the most recent Common Council cycle. For the City Channel and Council Rewind, I'm Dustin Weiss.